Hey, I'm Devon. Happy Palm Sunday and welcome to West B. Save the date of Sunday, April the 23rd for beach baptism at Bayfront Park, Anna Maria. If you'd like to be baptized at the beach, go to baptism.westb.org or call the church office. More details coming soon. Our quarterly business meeting will be held Sunday, April the 16th in the sanctuary at 6 p.m. All ministry teams will be meeting for a time of fun, fellowship, and training beginning at 4:30 p.m. in the fellowship hall. Join us Friday, April the 7th at 7 p.m. for our Good Friday service at our 43rd Street campus. We will also observe the Lord's Supper that evening. Service on Easter Sunday will be at 8, 9:30, and 11 a.m. and at Southside at 11 a.m. Well, that's it for now. Happy Holy Week and let's worship together.
History remembers great heroes, but history also remembers the big cowards. Now, I'm going to show you a picture, and I am assuming that most of you are not going to recognize who this is unless you just happen to be somebody who's really into the history of the Titanic. This picture is of J. Bruce Ismay, and he was the managing director of the White Star Cruise Lines. And in 1912, he boarded their newest vessel, the Titanic, and he was excited to be one of the high-ranking officials aboard this ship. Now, since he was the highest-ranking person to survive the sinking of the Titanic, he was vilified. Now, you could probably make the argument that anybody who was high-ranking that survived was going to be vilified, but there were a lot of people who had concerns about his behavior. In fact, many people thought that he was a big coward, that he had left behind women and children on this ship. And that may be true. There were some eyewitnesses that said that he was the one who pushed the captain to increase the speed of the Titanic to arrive in New York ahead of schedule. And, well, whether he was guilty or not is not the point. He became the talk of society. Everyone thought he was a coward, and so much so that the town of Ismay, Texas, no connection to him whatsoever, this town decided to change the name of their community to something, anything less humiliating, they said. So there is no Ismay, Texas, because they changed the name of the town. Now, the accounts of his actions are now debated, and a lot of historians go back and forth as to what he really did and what really happened and what level of cowardice did he really demonstrate. But history does remember him as a coward. History remembers the heroes. History remembers the cowards. The last hours of Jesus separate the cowards from the hero of the story. Now, today is Palm Sunday. Well, you might be watching this on Saturday, but we're at the point in the calendar where we begin Passion Week. We're leading up to Easter. And Palm Sunday is the Sunday before Resurrection Sunday. It's the start of Passion Week, the last 7 days of Jesus' earthly ministry. And that palm in Palm Sunday references Matthew chapter 21, where people cut branches and laid them in front of Jesus as he entered into Jerusalem. And this is often called the triumphal entry of Jesus. But I want to fast forward a bit. We could look at the last days of Jesus, the last 7 days, and that would be worthy to do. But I want to look at his last hours. And that'll be this series. We'll have a Palm Sunday service. We'll have a Good Friday service, and obviously Easter as well. So in the span of about 1 week, the people around Jesus moved from calling him king to crucify him. And it is a dramatic turn of events. But we all know how fickle people can be. I mean, let's think about what happened to Jesus. Judas betrayed him. Jesus was arrested by a mob. He was deserted by his disciples. He was denied by Peter, and now he stands trial. So let's go look at these last hours of Jesus. And we're going to begin in John 18. So go get those Bibles, open them up, turn them on. Let's go to the text. This is very important. I know you're watching this via video, but hey, let's get our Bibles out. Whether you've got a digital or a print Bible like mine, let's get them out. John 18, verse 28. Jesus' trial before Caiaphas ended in the early hours of the morning. Then he was taken to the headquarters of the Roman governor. His accusers didn't go inside because it would defile them, and they wouldn't be allowed to celebrate the Passover. So Pilate, the governor, went out to them and asked, "What is your charge against this man?" "We wouldn't have handed him over to you if he weren't a criminal," they retorted. "Then take him away and judge him by your own law," Pilate told them. "Only the Romans are permitted to execute someone," the Jewish leaders replied. This fulfilled Jesus' prediction about the way he would die. We'll stop right there for now. Jesus would go through two trials. He would have a religious trial and a civil trial. The religious trial was within the nation of Israel. It was by the Hebrew people, and Caiaphas and Annas were the ones who were part of this religious trial. They could decide that he needed to die, but you needed Rome, which was Pilate, to actually carry out the execution, and that was the civil trial. So you have the religious side of this and the civil side of this coming all together. So Jesus is taken to Annas first. He held the most power, and then to Caiaphas next. He was the functional high priest, but he was just a puppet of Annas. And then in verse 28, they take Jesus from the scene of the religious trial to the scene of the civil trial. Well, let's pick back up again in verse 33. Then Pilate went back into his headquarters and called for Jesus to be brought to him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked him. Jesus replied, "Is this your own question? Or did others tell you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate retorted. "Your own people and the leading priest brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world." Pilate said, "So, you are a king?" Jesus responded, "You say I am a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize what I say is true." "Are you the king?" Pilate asks. Now, this is a political question, not a theological question. That's kind of the key to this. What Pilate is asking Jesus is, are you the leader of a disruptive movement? Are you going to mess things up for me? Are you going to cause a ruckus out here and upset the Pax Romana, upset the Roman peace? Because if that's the case, I'm going to have to deal with you. When Jesus stood before Pilate on trial, it says in verse 37 that he testified to the truth. All who love the truth recognize what I say is true. So Pilate asks him in John 18:38, what is truth? What is truth? Pilate asks. Then he went out again to the people and told them, he is not guilty of any crime. So Pilate's basically saying, okay, theologically, I don't care about any of that. I'm just checking to see if you're going to threaten my power. If you're not going to threaten my power, I'm really not all that worried about it. If you're not going to cause a scene, I'm not really worried about it. Now, what is really at play here? Truth reveals personal responsibility. That's where we will begin. God is in control. Even governments don't have authority apart from God. Romans 13:1 tells us that. But you are personally responsible for your behavior. Yes, God is sovereign, but you have personal responsibility too. So Pilate wants out of this situation. He's frustrated with the whole ordeal, but nobody is going to escape the question, who is Jesus? So in verse 33, Pilate asks, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus responds in verse 34, well, why do you ask? Because of others? Or are you interested yourself? Jesus goes after him personally. Perhaps Jesus is pursuing him like he pursues you for salvation. And Jesus tells him, you have a responsibility to decide who I am. Now here's what is truth. Well, truth is not an abstraction. Truth is actually and ultimately a person. Here's why this is important in the Bible. Jesus is truth. You can't have a relationship with a concept, but you can have a relationship with a person. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Truth must be personal for it to be living. This is why we talk about Jesus being the living truth. Salvation is more than a concept. Salvation is all about your relationship with Jesus. Now, like Pilate, you can't go through this life neutral. You have to decide for yourself. And that's what Pilate was trying to do. He was a coward, and he's trying to wiggle out of this. But you can't evade truth. And truth, one way or another, will come into your life. Either you will accept truth or truth is going to hunt you down. You will either have a rude awakening or you will have a spiritual awakening. And the reason that I preach every week is so that people have spiritual awakenings. But either way, truth will wake you up. Now let's continue with the story. With Pilate, we pick up again in verse 38. What is truth? Pilate asked. Then he went out again to the people and told them, he is not guilty of any crime, but you have a custom of asking me to release one prisoner each year at Passover. Would you like for me to release this king of the Jews? But they shouted back, no, not this man. We want Barabbas. Barabbas was a revolutionary. Then Pilate had Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him. Hail, King of the Jews, they mocked as they slapped him across the face. It continues there with what happened to Jesus. Pilate wants to escape accountability, but no one does with Jesus. Pilate is weak, but clever. In fact, he tries to wash his hands of this scene in Matthew chapter 27. It's symbolic of, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And we've got a scene here where you see the hate of the people and the cowardice of Pilate, but you also see the courage of Jesus. Now, here's the thing about cowards. Cowards choose self-preservation over self-sacrifice. Jesus here is the ultimate hero. It's all about self-sacrifice for him. Pilate is the typical coward. It's all about self-preservation. Now, in your own life, and this is very important, the courage of Christ defeats our sinful cowardice. How do we overcome our own cowardice? We overcome it through Jesus Christ. The religious leaders fear Jesus. Pilate fears the religious leaders. Jesus fears nothing. Now, a little background here. Pilate and the Jews do not have a good relationship. As soon as Pilate starts ruling in this area, he's just facing constant conflict. The Roman Empire has basically told Pilate, hey, either shape up or ship out. You're on short notice. Well, what defines the Roman Empire? There's a few things here, big picture items, but one that most historians will point to is the Pax Romana. It's Latin for Roman peace. When the Romans conquered people, they let them keep their customs and they let them keep their laws as long as they didn't revolt. And that's why Jesus has two trials. You've got the trial that is a religious trial, and then you have the trial that is the civil trial. You've got one under Israel, you've got one under Rome, because that was the practice of Rome in the empire. Hey, so long as you don't cause trouble and you pay your taxes, we'll let you be. We come down hard on you, though, if there are uprisings. Now, under Pilate, the Jews have figured out that he's weak. They figured out that he's a coward. And so they pressure him. Do what we want or we'll revolt again. And Pilate has to remind them of who he is. So let's pick this story up again in verse 4. Pilate went outside again and said to the people, I'm going to bring him out to you now, but understand clearly that I find him not guilty. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said, look, here is the man. When they saw him, the leading priests and the temple guards began shouting, crucify him, crucify him. Take him yourselves and crucify him, Pilate said. I find him not guilty. The Jewish leaders replied, but by our law he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him, where are you from? But Jesus gave no answer. Why don't you talk to me? Pilate demanded. Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or crucify you? Then Jesus said, you would have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin. So Pilate says, I'm the authority here. And Jesus basically says, no. And then verse 12. Then Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders shouted, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. So Pilate gets scared. He tries to release Jesus, but it doesn't happen. Cowards are more concerned about saving their necks than they are saving their souls. So you think of the neck. The neck is tangible. It connects the head to the body. There's this. You talk about saving your neck. You feel like there's this immediate need. You threaten the neck, people react. But the soul. You talk about the soul. The soul is vague, but the soul is eternal. You threaten the soul, people might laugh at you, but it's a very serious thing. So Pilate has two choices here: to do what's right and to let Jesus go and lose power, the people revolt. But it would save his soul. But he doesn't want to save his soul. He doesn't want to do what's right. So he chooses to do what's wrong. That's the second choice here, to capitulate to the people, to keep his power, to save his neck. But in the long run, saving your neck doesn't save you. It's your soul that needs saving. Now, in Luke's gospel, Pilate passes Jesus off to Herod. Jesus is from Galilee. That's his territory. I'll let Herod handle it, and Herod just sends Jesus right back to Pilate. When pressed, we'll always default to our necks. Apart from the Holy Spirit, we'll neglect our souls, and we won't have godly courage on our own. Can't happen. We need Jesus. Now, Pilate tried to do everything he could to get rid of Jesus, but he couldn't. Pilate had a choice to make. Now, in Matthew's gospel, we learn that Pilate's own wife says she has dreams. She says, have nothing to do anything with this Jesus. You may try all sorts of things to get Jesus out of your head, off your heart, even out of your soul. You may try to drown out God's voice with the noise of this world. But like Pilate, you have a choice. Every single one of us has this choice: kill Jesus or accept him. Now, cowards submit to fear rather than truth. Pilate knows Jesus is innocent. We see that in the text. And Pilate knows that he's really no threat to Rome. Pilate has a sense of justice, but he puts his own welfare above it. Pilate is fearful about, what the people may be doing. And Pilate even suspects Jesus' claims may be true. I mean, if you look deeply here into verse 9, where are you from? Are you really God's son? I mean, he has some idea that maybe there's some truth to this. Now, Jesus, throughout this whole ordeal, for the most part, silent, which is a fulfillment of prophecy from Isaiah 53 that says, "And as a sheep is silent before the shears, he did not open his mouth." His silence is also a pause. He's waiting on Pilate to decide. So let's think about this. Jesus often asks questions, particularly when he was ministering. He would ask a question to elicit a faith response. He would ask a question an obvious question to try to get people to respond. And here he's doing something similar. He's being silent. He's waiting on Pilate to make a choice. Sometimes when God is silent in your life, he's waiting on you to act. He's waiting on you to decide. And we'll complain, "God, why are you silent?" And God's saying, "I'm waiting." Now, despite Jesus' innocence, Pilate has him killed anyway. He knows that Jesus is not a threat to Rome, but Jesus is a threat to Pilate. And so Pilate plots. It's custom to release a prisoner of the people's choice around Passover. It was a goodwill gesture to keep the peace, keep the people under control. So Pilate cleverly says, "I know what I'll do. I'll use Barabbas as leverage. Hey, Jesus, the king, or Barabbas, the dangerous revolutionary." Pilate even goes so far as to have Jesus flogged. Brutal torture. This mixture of brass and lead and bone. A skilled torturer could shred the back so much that inner organs would be exposed. This is actually the bruising of the heel, the striking of the heel that we find prophesied in Genesis 3:15. That happened to Jesus. Pilate thought that maybe this would pacify the people, but like a shark feeding frenzy, the blood that is introduced only makes the crowd want more violence. And the irony here is that they release the false insurrectionist, Jesus, for the true insurrectionist, that is Barabbas. They chose the worst of humanity over the best of humanity. Why? Because Jesus is God. And when God confronts you, either you fall to your knees or you violently rebel. So this is the point of the last straw for Pilate. And despite his fear of Jesus, and I mean that in a good way, like he's thinking, is he really God's son? Pilate feared the emperor more. Self-preservation kicked in. And in this case, for Pilate, as a coward, self-preservation trumped what he knew to be true. Pilate and the people had made their choice. The people's choice. Here's the man, Jesus. Well, we want him crucified. Here's your king. Crucify him. And the people scream, "Take him away. We have no king but Caesar." What controls you? Fear, self-preservation, saving your own neck? Let me tell you this. The most courageous decision you can make right now is to say yes to Jesus. And that is what we're confronted with. That is God confronting you. Either you're going to choose to save your own neck and ultimately lose your soul, or you can choose right now to have God save your soul and to be with him for all eternity.